You escaped and came to England because you're a flyer. You came because you wanted to fly with us and fight the Germans. We can get out now. We can get back to England. Danny, if you don't go through that tunnel, everything you've done will have been for nothing. Nothing.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where this week we return to the world of World War II Germany to conclude our exploration of The Great Escape. I am Steve Morris. I am a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. I am John Roca. I'm a writer, producer, and host in San Diego, California, and a little less of an optimist than Steve Morris, claiming that we're going to conclude. We shall see how long it takes us. I might break down like Charles Bronson does in the movie and delay this out one more part because I don't want to go through the tunnel. So we will see how this all ends up, Steve.
It's so funny watching this movie because I've just watched the whole thing like, nope. No, I'll go help with scrounging. I'll do diversions. I'm not going through that tunnel.
Oh, yeah. The tunnel is madness. The tunnel is madness, man. Especially as it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Oh, yeah, absolutely, man.
So where we left off, Steve McQueen had just been presented with the plan of escaping and purposely letting himself get caught in order to bring information back to the camp, to which he said, I wouldn't do that for my mother. Mm-hmm. And then we cut to a quiet game of chess between Colin and Henley, Donald Pleasance and James Garner. And I love that Henley, it starts with him going, check.
Yeah.
My guess is that Henley's a really good chess player, that this is an even game. Mm-hmm. There's so much about their relationship that is totally unspoken, which I think is why I like the friendship so much.
It's ironic considering how Americans are known for talking too much and being too brash and constantly, doing all these things. To have an American in the movie that doesn't do that, I think is really great.
I totally agree. And as they're playing chess, in comes Werner, very, very stressed out because he can't find his wallet. And I love Garner's just sort of...
He lost his wallet. Do you realize what would happen if Strachwitz found this out? Zit! The Russian front.
Let me ask you something. Do you feel bad for Werner? I mean,
yes,
you do, right? You shouldn't. He's a Nazi guard, for God's sakes. But clearly he's not a guy that's like 100% committed to the philosophy. And so you feel a little bad that James Garner's taken advantage of him, which I don't want to feel bad for a Nazi. But yeah.
But this is the thing is that we talked about it many, many times. Is like these are soldiers fighting for their country. Right. And I am certain Werner was drafted. It's not like he went. I mean, Werner is not a guy who chose to be a soldier.
Right. Exactly. It looks very clearly he did not.
Yeah. No, I feel terrible for him. And yet it's also totally fun.
Yeah. Very true.
Because Henley is promising they'll look for it, and when Werner tries to look in their room, he says
it might look a little peculiar if you and I were seen probing around at this time of night.
Oh.
And you can see that he's going, thank goodness I have such a great friend in Henley in this moment.
Yeah.
And he heads to the door, and then Henley says, oh, it's one more thing.
A camera. We want to take some snapshots, keepsake. 35 millimeter with 2.8 lens and a plane shutter.
And Colin corrects him.
Focal plane shutter.
Werner, that's a focal plane shutter.
And then the coldness with which he says,
let me know when you got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when Werner knows that he's fucked.
He's a crazy, mixed up kid, that Werner. But I like him.
Yeah, look, I know people might say, why is there humor in a situation? But you have to have that a little bit to offset the drama in the movie and what the stakes are. And of course, what we're heading towards, Steve. And I think this is one of the, God damn it, as we talk about it more, this is one of the secret gifts of the movie, is the way it establishes the humor as a way of making you feel comfortable, making you feel like it's possible and exciting and thrilling and they're all going to get away. And if you've never read the story, you have no idea what's coming. And when it comes, it's such a smack in the face.
this is why the studios said we don't want to do this movie.
Yeah.
Because they just looked at the ending. They're like, this is a horrible tragedy where people work really hard and they all get killed, and which is what it is.
Yeah.
And yet the movie is so fun. And it's like, I'm going to make a totally bizarre comparison, which is that I am certain when James Gunn goes to pitch Guardians of the Galaxy, it's just like, you want to do what? Because it doesn't make sense. But then once you're in the movie and understand those characters and how much fun they are.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like this is the same thing. This movie is so much fun.
Yeah.
Through most of it, it's just when you get to the ending. And even then they kind of manages to twist it a little bit.
Would you say that it's American fun? Like it's got that American swagger, even though we're focusing, we've got Steve McQueen, we've got James Garner, but everyone else is pretty much from another country. Do you think it has that vibe? Because you've got an American director, you've got an American approach?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I have an answer because my first response, my instinct is yes, absolutely. This is a very American feeling movie. But it's not like there's not the reserved Britishness and Scottish characters. And,
sure.
But it is it does feel like an American film.
Yeah, like I've watched British war movies, British World War II movies. They don't have any of this kind of humor. It's much more in between the lines or the occasional smirk. Yeah. But this feels like a very American approach to this story, so to speak.
We're down in the tunnel digging, and we see these bags of dirt get put on this sled that gets wheeled through this place. And then Roger is talking to Danny, ask how it's going.
No good. No good? Today, 3 times.
And as he's describing this, what's happening to him, which is obviously a tunnel collapse, there's a tunnel collapse on Willie, and they barely managed to drag him out.
Yeah.
So this whole tunnel is an amazing piece of set.
Mm-hmm.
It's all built on a stage. It is genuinely long. And it's like what they did was they essentially built a wall of dirt and then built the tunnel into the wall of dirt.
Mm.
And they were very determined that when they were filming that, you always felt the size of that tunnel.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of wide angle lenses. The cinematographer, by the way, is Daniel L. Fapp, who also did West Side Story.
Oh, wow.
And Ice Station Zebra.
Oh, which is something Sturgis directed as well.
Yeah. And it's really hard when you think about it. It's like, how do you light a 2 foot by 3 foot space where you're only looking at it from one direction? Like, where do you put the lights? Like, how do you do it? It was actually really difficult to figure out how to light this thing. And they drag Willie out. And again, Danny, very intensely, this is Charles Bronson, says
4 times today. This way we never get through. We must have more wood.
And so now we got to figure out how we're going to get more wood. And so we have this sequence of Cavendish leading the 12 Days of Christmas in a very intense, enthusiastic choir.
Yeah. It's a very aggressive choir, man.
Yeah, for Christmas carols, which, by the way, apparently they were singing Christmas carols all through, like in June.
Yeah.
And none of the Germans stopped them or thought it was weird.
Yeah. Like, I guess they celebrate Christmas in June or July, I guess.
They just love these songs, man. And as this is going on, we hear that wood is getting taken out of the rafters. And then we see Hiltz pulling wooden slats out of the bunk beds, and he takes a few more and he takes a few more, and he's got this huge stack of wood, and he's going to take even more out, where you're going like, that's a lot of wood out of that bunk bed. And again, it's just McQueen is just interesting to watch, and watching him lift up this ridiculously huge stack of wood.
Yeah.
It's just fun.
Yeah. Agreed.
And then in comes Cavendish, still singing the 12 Days of Christmas. He tries to talk to him before Cavendish does his alley up.
Say, Cavendish.
And jumps up and then crashes straight through 3 bunk beds.
I love it. I love the look by Steve McQueen when he comes back in with the wood like that. All right, cool.
Never mind. Which, by the way, that's that actor, and that looks painful.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Henley delivers the camera to, I love Donald Pleasance's choice that everything is just British underplay. He goes,
Present from our friend Werner.
Splendid.
Watching Charles Bronson pull himself through that whole tunnel.
Yeah.
So here's I mentioned there's this guy, Wally Floody, who was a Canadian who was one of the Tunnel Kings.
Yeah.
And this is what he said as he's there on the set and helping them build things. And this is how we did this. And this is what it's really like. And it sounds like he was very specific that the crew gets it right. A lot of details. And he comes into work one day and he says, you know what? I think you finally got it right. And they go, oh, great. What made you make that decision? He's like, well, tonight I was back having nightmares.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just from being on the set, or did he
Yeah.
go through the tunnel to kind of see if it was authentic?
Oh, he went through the tunnel.
Oh.
I should have said, one of the things he said, he's like, no, this is still I have too much room. My left shoulder would have been scraping on the wall at this point, and I had to keep my head lower at this point, make it smaller. So they would make it smaller.
Wow.
And then he starts having nightmares.
I mean, imagine that's where they want to be authentic. Imagine being Charles Bronson. Like, I would go insane because I have claustrophobia shit, so I can't even imagine as an actor what it would be like. But I guess it helps to bring the performance,
It's funny you should mention that. That's the next thing I was going to say. Remember I said that Bronson's dad died when he was very young and he was a miner, and that Charles Bronson at 10 years old had to start working in the coal mine?
Right, yes.
Which is where he developed claustrophobia. Horrible claustrophobia.
Wow.
Yeah.
We had that to play this character. Oof. That's great.
Which I think, and that's part of why this is his best performance that I know of like just the most sensitive,
Yeah.
And what we see they're doing is he's got this string because we're basically running a line for Cavendish to measure how long the tunnel is.
Right.
And you think about this, like you have to dig for 335 feet or whatever they said it was.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know how far you've gone? You know?
Yeah. You got to estimate.
Yeah. And the other thing we see is we're discussing how far we are, which is about 50 feet, I think, from the trees at this point, is we see Hiltz and Goff, and Henley, and they've all got a whole bunch of potatoes. We cut to them grinding up the potatoes, and the camera pulls back, and we see that they have in front of them a still. And the still has just started to produce alcohol, and Steve McQueen puts his finger forward and takes a little taste and goes, wow. Then Henley.
Wow.
And then Goff with a cough.
Wow.
Wow.
And then we basically repeat it again. It's later, and now they have a jug that they fill with booze. And again, we go around. Hiltz drinks.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So this is one of those scenes. It's so fun, I think. And one of the producers on the set this day, and this took a day to shoot. It's fairly simple setup, but you had to get all the pieces right. You got to get all the performance right. And the producer is incensed. He's like, we're behind on schedule. We're spending a whole day to get 3 words. Like, that's what a waste of time this is.
Yeah.
And Sturgis says, wait till you see the movie in the theater. And McQueen's wow, his saying that is the biggest laugh in the whole movie.
Directors know sometimes.
Well, and if you ever had to do a bit like this, where it's like you got one word and you have to differentiate the way you said the word from the previous guy's word,
Of course. Yeah.
That is a special kind of acting, and not one that I would have been good at. By the way, just because I had to look it up, it takes about 20 pounds of potatoes to make a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka. In case you were wondering how much this would take. I saw varying things on the internet, but that's
depending. Yeah, I'm sure from different people who've made it. Yeah.
I have not actually built my own still.
I have no interest in doing that.
No, because I could go buy the alcohol that tastes good, not drink the horribleness that I would make. It's morning. Hiltz explodes something in a garbage can. Again, Steve McQueen's ability to, like, he scratches his ear, and for some reason it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because of McQueen. 3 guys show up. They each take another drink, and now we see them putting on the headband with the drum, and it starts to dawn on you what it is they're about to look like, which is the 3 Revolutionary War soldiers. And they go forward, march, and start playing Yankee Doodle. By the way, there were Americans who did this, but what they did wasn't the 3 sort of soldiers. They had 2 guys act as a horse, and the third act as Paul Revere riding on their back, yelling, "The British are coming." And Sturgis didn't think that was visually as strong as what he chose to do.
No, I agree. I think he made the right choice.
By the way, they have no musical ability whatsoever, these 3 actors. There's no relationship between what they're doing and what we're hearing.
That's great.
I love as the British come out and realize what's going on, that this is the 4th of July. And I love all of the Brits going,
Up the rebels!
Down the British!
Gentlemen, if you care to follow us, how about hey?
and they start serving out the moonshine.
Yeah. This is the hubris moment of the movie for me.
Yeah. It's the emotional high point of the fun. Yeah. And I love all of McQueen's little lines like,
American moonshine. Don't smoke right after you drink.
we cut to Roger, who's taking a sip and says,
In the 3 years, 7 months, approximately 2 weeks that I've been in the bag, that's the most extraordinary stuff I've ever tasted. Oh, it's shattering.
I think it's rather good.
have you ever had moonshine?
No.
Everclear?
Oh, no.
Or-
Yes. I think Ian once gave me moonshine that he had brought from Tennessee years ago. And it was like swallowing liquid glass. It was just insane. Because I'm not a heavy drinker or, I'll have liquor if we're out socializing, but I don't drink liquor at the house or anything like that. So it's always a new experience when I have it. And when I had moonshine, I was like, never again. Never again.
I had the same experience.
Yeah.
It just like was going to burn a hole through my throat.
Fine.
And what I wonder is like, you just add a little water to it and then it wouldn't be quite as like, are all these guys drinking it straight? You don't have to actually drink it straight.
No.
I love every moment with Henley and Colin. Henley sits down next to him.
You know what that is?
I tell you what it isn't. It isn't Napoleon brandy.
There's also just I won't play it, but a ridiculously funny, awkward, non-conversation between Hiltz and the high officers of the British command, where they're just like they're shattered by the booze, can't figure out what to say, and just have this a very funny, awkward moment. While all this is going on and everyone is happy and everyone is celebrating, the goons, the Germans, are inside Hut 105.
Yeah.
And we see them standing near the stove. And Danny realizes that they're in the hut and they all start to be aware of it and they can't do anything, can't say anything. And they're like, well, they've searched it a lot. They've never found anything. And we see the sergeant sit down on the bed and feel something weird. And he pulls out the strange boards that were used to lift that stove out of the way. And you start to go, oh, shit. And while this is happening, McDonald has gone over to see Ives. And he's kind of cheering him up and like, we're going to be, because they're both Scots and we're going to be on Argyle Street. And Ives goes, yeah, I think this is going to work. Like the tunnel's going to work.
We're nearly at the trees, boy. We're nearly at the trees, eh?
And they start singing and they start dancing. And it is the most joyful moment of the movie and the most filled with just total freaking dread. And Werner, our friend Werner, who we felt sad for in the previous scene, pours himself a cup of coffee, drops the cup of coffee, it falls on the tile, and he looks down and watches the coffee strain through the tile. He pours some more, calls the sergeant, and then outside we hear the yells and the whistles, and the music changes, and we hear,
oh my God, they found Tom.
It's a crushing moment.
What an interesting decision to make it Werner. Like, was it because, like, why didn't Werner fear that he would get called out or revealed? Was this his way of maybe evening the playing field and removing the thing they had hanging over him? I don't know, but it's an interesting choice to make it Werner because of all the people I thought he might try to cover it up. So when he doesn't and he calls attention to it, it's an interesting moment in the movie for sure.
I have those same feelings that you do. I also think there's like we don't get to know if he's going fuck Henley.
Yeah.
Like Henley's blackmail. He stole my wallet and now he's blackmailing me.
Right.
We don't get to know if that's in there.
Yeah.
I also get the sense of like, I mean, because right at the very beginning with him and Henley is at the car where Henley makes the joke about stealing tools and he goes, stealing tools cooler.
Yeah.
Like he's torn between, I think he genuinely is a sensitive, would be a nice guy.
Yeah, right.
This is his job, and he's going to get sent to the Russian front if he gets in trouble.
I think it would have been nice to have a shot of him looking out the window and seeing Henley and Colin, and then maybe hesitating and looking back. and then making a change in his face and decides to do it. So you've got an understanding that there is a way, there is a reason for why he's doing what he's doing.
I think would have been a great addition because it gives him a thought process.
Yes, exactly.
It would also lead us to have this exact even more so this discussion as on our episode of the Cine-Files of like what made him make that decision. You know, he looked at right at Henley and then did it. Everyone, just like at the beginning, when everyone arrived at the camp for the first time, everybody is off doing stuff and looking at things, and Ives looks at the wire. And right at this moment, when they find Tom and everyone is running towards the hut in a panic, Ives looks up at the fence.
Yeah.
And you just know. And he's walking towards the wire. Hilt sees him and can't stop him, and he crosses the line of death. And they aim at him, and Steve McQueen does this like running, jumping slam into one of the guys to knock off his aim. But another guard takes him down, and Ives doesn't stop climbing that fence, and they open fire, and they kill him hanging off that fence.
It's the beginning of like you said, it was the emotional high point. Now come the consequences. Now come the stakes to remind us what this really means, man.
And it's the critical character change because we left off with Steve McQueen saying, I wouldn't do that for my mother.
Yeah.
And now as he watches Ives get killed on the fence, he walks up to Roger and says,
Let me know the exact information you need. I'm going out tonight.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice, too, when you look at, we don't talk about this enough sometimes, Steve, and it's because, we're more focused on the acting, the writing, the story, the directing, the what have you. But the costume choice, too, here with Hiltz, he's in a bright red button-down shirt with that black vest. Everyone else is in these muted cream, blue, green colors. So he stands out. And even that medallion that he's wearing there, it's very 70s in terms of its look, or late 60s, 70s. So there is this feeling of like there's rebellion here. And even the way he looks and the way he's dressed reflects that rebellion. So when he comes up and says that, there's even more power that the guy who's always tried to be exclusive and different from everybody now wants to help. And so I think there's a real interesting decision by the costumers to go that route with him.
I totally agree. It's funny. I hadn't thought about it till you said it, but he's kind of red, white, and blue.
A little bit. Yeah.
And what's interesting, we said at the beginning that McQueen's kind of in a different movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he's dressed differently. He acts differently. He's like Henley is part of Colin, who's part of the big organization. Hiltz is tied with Ives, who really isn't,
Right.
And everybody else is working closely together as a team, and he's off doing his own thing. And so this is the moment too that this is what's his name, Jimmy Chitwood joining the team.
Yeah. And the Hoosiers. Yep.
I believe that is my first Hoosiers reference. I'm shocked that I actually pulled that name out.
Respect, man. Respect.
And it's so funny because they ask Roger, like, what are we going to do? And he says,
Open up, Harry. We dig. Around the clock.
I really feel like this is where there should be an intermission in this movie.
Oh, good point. Absolutely. The perfect place. Because they actually go to black frame. So it's the perfect place to put an intermission.
And yet and as far as I could tell, there was no intermission. I'm like, it's a 3-hour movie. Like it seems like one where we could all get up and have a pee break.
Yeah.
But we see Hiltz go to that same spot on the wire, cuts through the line. By the way, so we have thousands and thousands of feet of barbed wire.
Yeah.
Want to know how they got it?
Please.
It's not barbed wire. It's all like yarn with little twists in it because barbed wire is A, expensive, and B, hurts.
Yeah.
And so it was all the cast and crew, when they weren't doing anything, were just tying little knots in this yarn to make it. And this is the thing that I heard over and over again. And we've heard this on a few other movies. The one that pops in my mind most is Apollo 13, which is that there was a sense that what they were doing, the whole cast and crew, was important. And so everybody is putting in extra hours.
Yeah.
Everybody's just like, work a full day and then would go, hey, can I help out on the night shift? I'll tie more yarn. And this is cast and crew.
That's awesome.
It's really awesome. Yeah. We see Danny digging again and again, the way that Elmer Bernstein pulls out the music when the collapses happen. Because you have the music in this sort of methodical beat, and then the moment that it starts to go, music goes away. And then the car drives back with Hiltz, who walks in through the gate. And I love just the attitude when they search him of like, yeah, I've done this before. I know the drill.
Yeah.
And we get his theme music comes in and someone says,
I didn't think they'd catch him so soon. He wasn't caught.
He wasn't caught. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and then they toss Hiltz the glove.
Hiltz, welcome home.
And it's these rituals of going into the cooler and getting the baseball glove and the music hitting, and everything is the same. The guard that locks him in is the same guard. The shot of him going into the cooler is the same shot. And that's what's going to give it all this emotional resonance when we get to the end of the film. Yeah. Again, Danny digging, and right when it starts to collapse, the music cuts out, and then they have to drag Danny out of the debris and the dirt, and it is freaking terrifying. And I love Charles Bronson's performance here.
Are you all right, Danny?
Yes. All right. All right. Bring some shovels, I'm all right.
Colin working with a forger, and they've left out a whole eagle.
That's impossible. Yes. 4 days' work up the bloody spout.
And then he's alone, and he's looking at something through a magnifying glass, and then he looks without it, and we see things out of focus. The music becomes very dissonant, and we start to go, uh-oh. And he says,
I can't see a bloody thing.
Yeah, he's looking at his watch when he realizes, like, they can't even see the time.
McDonald is acting as like the German security, the police, and he's testing everybody, speaking to them in German as they show their papers.
Warum sind Sie hier?
Ich habe Urlaub bekommen. Ich gehe nach München und besuche meine kranke Mutter.
Your German's very good.
Oh, thanks, Mac. I've put in a lot of...
And then realizes that he screwed up, and McDonald says,
Oh, now watch it, Haynes. It's the easiest way in the world to trip up a suspect. Don't fall for that old gag.
it's the most painful plant in like any movie I can think of ever.
I know.
Because spoiler alert, you know, that's how McDonald is going to be the one that's going to fall for that trick. And it's just so awful. Well, and this also goes to the difference between seeing a movie once or seeing it once or twice and seeing it many, 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 many times. Because I'm living in the future.
Right.
I'm like, every time the scene comes up, I'm thinking about the fact that that's how McDonald is going to blow it.
Yeah.
We see Colin in his room that he shares with Henley. We see him put something down on the ground, walk back to the opposite door, walk very carefully, and then pick it up and then do it again.
Yeah.
And we're like, what is that? And Henley comes in. Colin turns to him and says,
Roger?
No, it's me.
because Colin can't see who it is.
Yeah.
I like the old escape suit.
Fine. How do you like mine?
And of course, he's not wearing his escape suit.
That looks splendid.
It's also all this moves me so much, their friendship and what's happening and all the unspoken stuff.
How does Henley catch on so quick that there's an issue with Colin? He catches on pretty quick. Like,
Well, first of all, he calls him Roger.
Oh, right. Yes. He mistakes who it is. Yeah.
But I think Henley has known for a while. He lives with this guy. I think his suspicion has been growing and growing and growing.
Right.
Outside in the dark, Danny wants to go through the wire and escape.
Danny, we're getting out through the tunnel. We're almost clear. But I can't go in that tunnel anymore. So I'm going out through the wire.
And to the point where Bronson is like in a panic. He is he is fully lost it. And Willie punches him and has to fight with him to keep him from running to the wire.
Yeah.
And Bronson says, and again, this is where I think he's more vulnerable here than in any other movie I can think of. He says,
Since I was a boy, I hate and feared little rooms, closets, caves.
Danny, you've dug 17 tunnels, over 17
Because
tunnels.
I must get out. I hide there, and I dig. But tomorrow night in the tunnel with all those men, I'm afraid maybe this time I will lose my head and ruin the escape for everybody.
what do you think of Bronson in this scene?
I think it's so wonderfully acted. Even if I may not be the big fan of his accent, the emotions and the performance here, I think, are really powerful in what he's navigating and experiencing. And he's still Charles Bronson. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that's what's so important about understanding. Charles is one of those actors that walk the line between movie star and actor, right?
Mm.
And they come along every once in a while. And even McQueen, I think you could argue that as well.
Oh, yeah.
They have this unique ability to act within movie star performances. And I think he's got that going on here. And this scene is so powerful because he never removes status, just like McQueen has status over the Scottish guy. Bronson has status over Danny. And when Danny punches him, Danny has the status over the other guy. And when the other guy punches him, Danny does not return the punch or does not hit him in the same level. He just says, don't do that, as a way of understanding, I could destroy you if I wanted to, but I don't want to do that. But it's also, he understands that this guy's probably doing this out of friendship and love for him. And that's how deep he had to go to make it happen. But yeah, wonderful performance. And seeing the levels that he goes to and then the journey he goes on emotionally over those lines, I think is fantastic to watch. It makes you care for him more as well. Sorry.
100%. And I think it's like, in a way, to me, it sends this important message that I don't think I fully understood, that gets stronger as I think about it today, which is our tendency is to think that manly guys don't show emotions. They don't show vulnerability.
Yeah.
And here we have the manliest of manly dudes in this movie, I think, Bronson, even more so than Steve McQueen, more so than any of the others.
Yeah.
And he shows true vulnerability, and it doesn't take away from his strength. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In fact, it adds to his strength, because you go like, oh, it's not just that you spent more time in this tunnel than anybody else, but you were more afraid and fought that fear to do this thing 17 times building these tunnels.
But I think that's what separates him from the same actors of his contemporaries, right? Because Charles always threw the vulnerability in, right? Even in Magnificent Seven, he's the one that tells the kids, spanks them and says, your fathers work harder than I could ever. They're more braver than I am. I couldn't live their life. I chose a different life, and it's, the coward's life, or a life of fear, And so I think that's always been an element of his. Even in Death Wish, the whole reason he's doing it is because of his daughter. So there's so much vulnerability in Charles as a natural human being, that to get the best actor out of him, you had to have those elements to his performances. And, whereas McQueen doesn't have that, or James Garner doesn't really show that till the end with Colin. And it's a good balance. Again, like when you're in an ensemble cast like this, you've got to find a way to stand out in your own way that also feels authentic to who you are as an actor. And I think Donald Pleasance and I think Charles Bronson find the moments to do so, and I think and we're about to get to a fantastic Donald Pleasance scene as well.
Well, let's just get to it, because we're back in that room, and in comes Roger. And I love Colin, because Colin still thinks that Henley is wearing his German clothes.
Yeah.
Because that's what he said. So he says,
well, how do you think we look?
Because he doesn't know that Henley's not wearing the German clothes. And then he speaks to him in German, and Roger doesn't say anything. And then, when someone says a sentence that starts with the first I wanna and gives you a compliment, that the next is going to be bad.
Yeah, agreed.
What's the matter, Roger?
You can't go.
What do you mean?
I can't allow it.
Why?
Because you can't see your hand in front of your face. You'll be caught before you got 10 yards.
I love things that are set up this way, which is he did a thing that we had no idea, we didn't understand what it was, which is walking over and picking something up. And then he goes, it's ridiculous. And he kind of uses that line to get past Roger and get to the door, where he positions himself in exactly the position he was in before. And we go, oh, and we see him take those very careful steps and pick up a pin that he says he could see from across the room.
Yep.
And then Roger says,
Colin, do you see the foot of the door?
Yes, of course.
Put the pin down there, will you?
And as Colin walks forward, Roger lifts up his leg and trips him.
Yeah.
And what's so great about the way the shot is framed is that you can see Henley on the other bunk watching all this happen.
Yeah, just so concerned.
It's sad.
And being unable to stop him, because he's got to be shown this. Yeah.
And I like, too, that Roger says, sit down. It was a good try. Like, he admires the pin gag and the work that went into figuring that out.
Right. Because he might do the same thing. He might have done the same thing as well. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and that's kind of what the next moment is.
I hate these last-minute letdowns, but I've only just been told. It's too risky for you.
And then Henley stands up for Colin.
Your idea of this escape is to start another front, to foul up the Germans behind the lines. All right, that's fine. That's fine.
First of all, just the straightness of that, of like, I am acknowledging that what your purpose is, which is to screw up the Germans.
Yes.
And we're going to do that. And that's great.
But once we get past that barbed wire, once we have them looking all over Germany for us, that mission is accomplished. Afterwards, we have some ideas of our own.
You mean getting home? Back to your family and children?
That's right.
And then I love seeing Roger's vulnerability.
Good God, man, do you really believe I haven't thought about that too?
I'm sure you have. I know Colin has. And Roger, I have too. We think we can make it all the way.
Not Colin. He'd be an appalling hazard to the whole escape. That must be my decision.
What do you think of Roger's decision to say that Colin can't go?
Well, I think it's the logical decision as a military man, because if you're doing a mission like this, the last thing you want to do, because everything is so planned out to the letter, is have everyone else picking up the slack for someone who can't see. And so that will cause more deaths and possibly cause the failure of the mission, because everyone's overcompensating for this person and might put themselves in bad positions because of that. So I understand why he's doing it. And I like the way he addresses it to him with respect, because they wouldn't even be in this position to be able to leave believably if it hadn't been for Colin. So there's a level of perspective, but also reality that I think is important here with Roger's decisions. And Henley stepping up to say he will take Roger with him, I think there's a real power in that. As you said, Steve, that's the relationship's been building to this moment, the entire movie. And this way he can go on the mission and only one person, and a person willingly, is sacrificing their possible success of the escape for Colin. And I think any general leader can take those odds.
I 100% think that it's the right decision to not have Colin go.
Yeah.
I mean, as you laid out, I mean, the variables in this thing are so complicated and everything is so thin. It is way too big a risk. And to be clear, this is not true. There was no blind guy that went out with the escapees. This was made up for dramatic effect. There were characters like Colin who had various aspects of who this character is, but none of them went blind, and no blind person went out. That being said, the moment at which Henley says,
Colin's not a blind man as long as he's with me. And he's going with me.
Great. And I love Donald Pleasance is just sitting there as his fate is being discussed. He doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
And this moment, again, it's the understated, very Britishness, really, of their friendship.
It's all right with you, Colin?
Yes. Quite.
That's it. Like, someone just said, I'm putting my life on the line to help you escape. And he just says, yes, quite. Mm. After Roger's gone, though, he says,
he's quite right. He's completely right. I really shouldn't go at all. My eyes have been getting worse and worse lately.
And then Henley just says,
oh, hell, we'll make it in great shape. Colin, do you have any tea?
Yes, of course.
Then let's have some.
Splendid.
Do you think Henley likes tea?
No, I think he thinks it's piss water, but he's doing it to make what's-his-face feel good.
That's totally what I think, too.
That's one of my favorite running gags of Ted Lasso, is how much he hates tea.
I remember having the first week, Karen and I were in England in the mid-90s. It was like the first big trip we ever took together.
Yeah.
And I had never had high tea
high tea.
London.
Right.
It's delightful.
It is. I know. My girlfriend loves high tea. So when we were there in 2018, we went to 3 different places to have high tea. And our last one was in Kensington. And it was really nice. You get those little cakes. It isn't just the tea, folks. You get cakes. You get like levels of cakes.
Little sandwiches.
The sandwiches, right. It's a really fun experience.
No, it is. I would say in general, British food is not at the top of my list of culinary, although there's lots of great food in England, obviously, but high tea, man, that's a great one.
Yeah, yeah.
Hiltz gets let out of the cooler, goes to see Mac.
When? Tonight?
By the way, when they did the actual escape was on March 24th, 1944. And one difference is that it was cold and it was snowing and the ground is covered in snow. It would have been too hard to shoot it that way.
Yeah.
And so they decided to forego it, but it was a rough night.
Yeah.
And we see all the guys now dressed in their German clothes showing up at this hut. Danny is down in the tunnel. You could tell he's barely holding it together. And for some reason, they turn on electric lighting and blow out all the little fat lamps they have. And I have no idea why they do this, except that it makes for a very dramatic moment later on with the electricity. It's like, well, why didn't you have electric lighting the whole time if you had it? Or why use it now? But it does get really dramatic. We say it's time. Roger and Mac head out. They go through the crowded space, down through the hole. We get on the cart and we see the mechanics of which is you're on this little cart and you bang it and someone pulls you through. And Danny is in the middle of the tunnel and panics and heads out. And you can see, I mean, he is right at the edge of totally falling apart.
These missions here, things are going to pop up because like anybody knows, you can practice and practice and practice. The game time is a whole nother ball game. And so you just never know what's going to pop up. And I love, for dramatic purposes, you're having this from someone like Danny, which of course we'd laid the groundwork for when he was out there wanting to jump through the fence or climb the fence. You know?
And our real life Tunnel King, Wally Floody, didn't go because of his claustrophobia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, and what I really like about it is that it's all altruistic. It's not just I'm scared. It's I'm scared I will mess it up for everybody else.
Yeah.
And the thing about Wally Floody having claustrophobia the night of escape probably saved his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Although in the movie, it's Bronson who escapes as the Tunnel King. That's not who it was. So he would have most likely been captured and killed. Yeah.
So we're at the end of the tunnel now, and Hiltz, who went out to get the information, he's got the choice spot. So he is the first guy in the tunnel, and we see him reaching up and sort of digging at the dirt, and they blow out the light, and he reaches up and pulls down some grass from the surface. It actually took them an hour to punch through that last foot because the ground was totally frozen.
Yeah.
And when he popped his head up into snow. I love the music as he pops his head up and we get that perspective of the camp from outside the fence, and then we also see that we are in the open, not near the trees. And he comes down and says,
"Hold on to yourself, Bartlett. You're 20 feet short."
What do you mean 20 feet short?
And he goes with his funny McQueen gestures.
The hole is right here in the open. The guard is between us and the lights. How could that happen? The survey took us.
What difference does it make? It's happened.
I have a theory of how it happened.
Oh, go ahead.
Which is I wonder if you weren't digging completely flat, or if the ground outside the camp weren't completely flat. If you ended up being deeper, you would have gone further and not gone as far as you thought you had if you were moving 300 feet at a slight angle. Yeah. That's my guess. But it's just like, and whose fault is this as far as we know? It's fucking Cavendish's fault. And they talk about postponing, but all the documents are dated today. Plus there's this hole in the ground now, where the grass is. That's tough.
Yeah.
And then Hiltz comes up with a plan, which is basically we're going to run a rope and I'll wait in the trees. And this is where, he is the hero. He was the hero for going out and allowing himself to be caught. Now he comes up with the system and he's going to wait in the trees and let other people go before him, even though he was supposed to go first because that was what he earned for allowing himself to get caught.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the weight of sitting here waiting for your turn and then hearing them go, "We need 30 feet of rope," and just going, what the fuck is going to happen?
I know. But, this is, again, this was great about these movies is these little ingenious obstacles they throw into it when the mission is going on. And you're just caught up on the edge of your seat with this kind of stuff.
Here's a screenwriting puzzle that I really think they did a beautiful job solving, which is, on the one hand, I don't think they have Roger and McDonald be among the first people to be ready to go. And I don't think it makes sense for the leader to be the first person to go.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think Roger would do that. But if Roger is not there first, then Steve McQueen can't talk to him when he discovers that they're short. So he needs to be out there first. And so it's like, oh, but that doesn't feel right. But then now Roger says, I'm not going to go until we get more people going and make sure this system is working. So now he can be the leader not going first. And he was out there first. And so we solved, you know what I mean? Like it solved all the screenwriting trouble.
Yeah.
And they start, Ashley Pitt heads out. And we watch this system working and people start moving through the tunnel. We get Colin and Henley. They get there. And now Willie's like, Danny, okay, it's time for us to go. And Danny's not moving. And then Willie says,
Danny, when Warsaw fell, you escaped and came to England because you're a flyer. You came because you wanted to fly with us and fight the Germans. We can get out now. We can get back to England. Danny, if you don't go through that tunnel, everything you've done will have been for nothing. Nothing.
And there's that pause. And this is that hero moment, that Danny turns and goes, okay. And he heads back to the tunnel. We see Sedgwick go down with his giant suitcase that they go like, how are you going to fit that through the tunnel? Apparently they shot a whole thing that it was filled with camping gear and a tent. And they had a whole scene of him revealing what was in the suitcase and just didn't use it. Colin and Henley make it out into the woods. And then we hear the air raid signal. And when the air raid signal happens, the electricity goes out. And Danny is in the middle of the tunnel when it suddenly goes black.
Really? Really?
And that little whimper he makes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing about this is when they actually went through the tunnel, they went through naked.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Because it's dirty and you didn't, if you went through in your nice new suit, you would get dirt all over your nice new suit. And so they go through naked with the suit in a bundle and then they can get dressed after. And I just go, can you imagine 30 feet underground in this tiny little enclosed space, naked, and the lights go out and there's dudes behind you and dudes in front of you.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how fucking terrifying that would be.
Yeah.
They get their little lamps lit and Danny makes his way through. And what they realize is, hey, during the dark, we could get a lot of guys out. So they do get a lot of guys out. This really did happen, by the way.
Yeah.
And then the air raid ends and the lights are coming back on. And then Cavendish is there and it's his turn to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes out of the tunnel and he trips and falls. It's fucking Cavendish's fault. Everything bad that happens is his fault.
Cavendish, man.
And it's so scary because the guards hear something and they're scanning the woods with a flashlight.
Yeah.
McQueen is hiding. Cavendish is prone, being totally motionless.
Yeah.
As the guard comes up and walks literally like a foot from his head.
It's so weird. Yeah. He's because I don't know why he doesn't look down. It's so weird to see him just kind of walking around in that way. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of it is that I think they lit it slightly too light, like a little too much moonlight. I think if it had been slightly darker, you wouldn't have had that thought. But I have the same thought. It's like, why can't you see that guy?
Right.
And then there's this other fucking guy who's hanging on the rope down in the tunnel and going, what's going on? Why haven't you signaled me yet? And so he makes a choice to pop his head out of the tunnel. At which point, all hell breaks loose.
Hey! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Get off!
And then the guards come to the hut and they find the tunnel. And what we find out the next day is 76 people got out.
So I want to stop a moment here because I couldn't bring this up in the first part of the show, but first episode of the show, but I want to bring it up in here. The guard who catches them, who's out there with the flashlight, who has been the guard that they turn the water on, and he's been the guy that's been
we've seen him several times.
Yeah. That is actor Till Kiwe, and he's German, and it's a fascinating guy because he was born in Germany and then got into drama and went to drama school in Baltimore, in Maryland. Before the outbreak of the Civil War, the World War II, rather, he went on a number of trips across the world and did all this stuff. Then he went back to Germany and joined the Nazis. He fought for the Nazis, received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross there for his battles in North Africa, and then he was captured. And he was captured by the Allies. And he was put in a camp in Colorado, and he kept breaking out of this prison camp in Colorado and kept getting caught. And then eventually the war ended. He was released in 1945 and then ends up going back to Germany to get into show business. So an interesting cat that was probably bringing some real world Nazi feelings or experiences here to this movie and adding even more authenticity maybe for some of the actors in the situation, even though he's like most of the time everyone else is getting the best of him, so to speak. In this moment where he catches them, I wonder if there's an irony that the guy who had escaped numerous camps or was the one who's catching the people escaping from his camp in the movie. But it's fascinating. So, I mean, I wanted to take a moment with him because it's such an interesting story that he came to the States, learned drama, went back to Germany, traveled all over the world, and then eventually joined up with the Nazis, fought for the Nazis, got awards from the Nazis, was captured by the Allies, transported back to Colorado, and then ends up going back to Germany and then finds his way onto this movie. So it's just a fascinating story.
This is where I wish, it's like, look, it's great that I got to listen to a commentary track where I could hear Sturgis's voice and James Colburn's and some of the other people that worked on it and James Garner. I want to hear this guy, who would never be in a commentary track or anything like that. But I would like, okay, well, what was your, did you support the Nazis or did you just support your country? And how did you feel being the guard in a movie about stopping it, where your job is to stop the escape, as a guy who had multiple escapes? What was all that like? And what was it like working with the Americans? I would love to hear all that stuff.
Yeah. And he was a paratrooper. So more what it must have been like to do that, for the Nazis and be in the war. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and if he served in North Africa, he might have served under Rommel.
Yes, he joined Rommel's crew. That's how he was part of Rommel's crew.
Fascinating.
For sure. Yeah. And he shows up in a number of films because he's in the Odessa File, which I think is a fun little 1970 film from the 1970s that explores some stuff. So he was in some American films, mostly German, but occasionally pop up in some American films.
So we're at a train station and we watch sort of our guys kind of wander up. We see Roger and Mac. We see Cavendish. Ashley Pitt is there. Henley and Colin walk up with Henley kind of guiding Colin because he can't see.
Yeah.
And it ends up that because of the schedules, a bunch of guys missed the train. So they're all piling up on this train. And then, of course, here come the Germans who are obviously looking for them. Mm-hmm. And I just love the moment that Henley and Colin are looking for a seat, and the only seat they can find is sitting directly across from two German officers, where one of the Germans has his feet on the chair and is asleep. And it's like, do we have to, you could see the wheels of like, we have to sit down. The normal behavior would be to wake this guy up, but oh boy, which they do. By the way, so the Department of the Interior and the German government was very supportive, and they said, "Hey, can we shoot on your railroad tracks?" And they said, "Sure, you can." And they bought two old train cars, and what they did was they essentially gutted half of each car to be able to put all the camera equipment and the lighting and all the stuff they wanted to do. And so what it was essentially one of them they gutted from the back so that the cameras could all look forward, and the other they gutted the front so the cameras could all see the back. So between the two of them, walking different directions, they could show multiple cars from multiple perspectives.
Makes sense.
But what they also had was a very polite dude who would say, because what they found out was there's only one train track.
Yeah.
So the guy would go, you might want to get off on a siding because the express is coming through at 80 miles an hour and we'll be here in 3 minutes. And so suddenly they have to go basically, oh shit, and get their little train off of the tracks before they were in a crash.
Wow.
As we're watching the train pull away, Sedgwick spots a bike, which he steals.
Yeah.
This was, I think, James Colburn's idea was for him to ride away on a bicycle. We see Steve McQueen pop up near a road, and he ties a wire to a post and runs it across the road and takes out a guy riding a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Setting up one of the most iconic things in the whole film.
Of course. Yeah.
By the way, the guy who crashes the motorcycle is his buddy, is Steve McQueen's riding buddy, whose name I think is Bud Elkin.
Oh, yeah, Bud Elkin. Yeah.
And the way it happened was McQueen basically when they came in with his motorcycle idea, he's like, these Germans are good motorcycle riders on the road, like for racing, but they'd never done off-road. I need someone who could do motorcycle riding off-road. So his buddy flies out to do this. This is the first movie he works on.
Yeah.
Danny and Willie spot a boat. So they steal a boat. Cavendish gets on a truck, and as soon as he gets on that truck, the music turns ominous.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I think, particularly in this sequence, the music from Elmer Bernstein, I won't put it quite at Jaws level of John Williams, but in each of these moments, as we go from Cavendish on the truck and the serious music, Danny and Willie are on a boat and the music becomes pastoral. We go to Steve McQueen, who's now in a German uniform, and the music becomes more aggressive, and then we're back to the train. Each musical change is telling us how we're supposed to feel about where we are, and we're going to go back and forth.
Yeah.
The German police are interrogating Roger and Mac for their passes.
Yeah.
Henley sees them, and he basically makes the decision, we're not going to make it here.
Yeah.
And he goes over to Ashley Pitt and kind of leans over him and says,
Tally-ho.
And then he gets Colin up and they move their way through the train car. And we see Ashley Pitt show his papers and speaks a little German. And he gets away with it. And I love Ashley Pitt's reaction after they walk away, like the fear hitting, right, when the Germans are gone.
Yeah.
And then Colin and Henley are on the back of the train outside.
Are the police on the train?
Yes, stop or with us. We're going to jump.
And Colin, again, in that just sort of soft tone that he's done everything with, says,
All right.
I'll tell you when.
I'd prefer you just to give me a good firm push.
Can you imagine being pushed off a moving train blind?
Blind? Yeah, no.
Fucking terrifying.
Yeah, 100%.
And they go off the train and roll down the hill. And you have your classic, by the way, the stuntmen roll behind the bale of hay.
Yeah.
And Colin and Henley, James Garner and Donald Pleasance poke their heads out.
You all right? Yes, I'm fine. It's quite exciting.
So funny.
So we've got a whole bunch of different people doing a whole bunch of different stuff. And I decided that we should do what we've done a few times before, which is rather than go through this cutting back and forth, let's tell each group's story as one. All right. So first up, Cavendish in the truck. He picked the wrong truck. He ends up in a crowd of German soldiers, and then he gets interrogated by the Gestapo.
Yeah.
And you could tell they are right away trying to peg him as a spy.
All I did was to escape from the prison camp. You do the same if you've been locked up for 3 years. I wanted to get home.
I don't think you'll ever see your wife and children again.
You've obviously got the wrong man. I'm not even married.
You're wearing civilian clothes. You're a spy.
Because I guess the rules are, if you are in your uniform, you're just an escaped soldier. If you have forged papers and are trying to look like something else, well, now you're a spy, and spies get shot. And after a brief interrogation, they open up a door, and we see that a whole bunch of other people have been caught.
Yeah.
Fucking Cavendish. Sedgwick. He is riding his bike up to the train tracks, jumps onto a cargo train, pulls in his bag, closes the door, the train heads off. My understanding is that this was kind of guerrilla-ish. They saw the train there and they said, hey, can we jump on your train when you pull away? And the guy's like, I don't care. And so they had him pull away. He jumped on the train, he jumped off the train, and they stopped for a second, and then the train left.
Yeah.
And we end up at a cafe like in France, and a German car pulls up, and the waiter is going out, taking their orders, being very polite to these German officers. And then there's this dude reading a newspaper, and it ends up that dude is Sedgwick.
Yeah.
There's a telephone call, and then the waiter goes up to Sedgwick and says,
Monsieur, telephone.
And he's like in his terrible Australian accented French accent, and says, for moi? And he walks over to answer the phone, and there's no one there. And he looks at these other two waiters who suddenly duck down as a car is approaching. And I love the sort of processing that James Colburn does. And then he ducks down as well. Yeah. And that car comes up, and it's a drive-by. He opens up the door. There's a machine gun, and they wipe out these German officers.
I have to believe Coppola was motivated by this scene for Sonny's death. Right? Because the dad and his son ducking under the bar mirrors the toll operator.
Yeah.
And then Coburn seeing it. Obviously, there's not a third person that ducks under in Godfather, but you see Coburn realize what's going on. He dunks under. Even Coburn is wearing kind of the brown, dark kind of suit, which I think is interesting too, and then goes down. And then you see these guys show up, the Vichy French, and they ice these guys right off the fucking planet. And it is a brutal moment. You know? Yeah. I have to believe, because it has shades of Sonny's death on the causeway. So to me, it feels like this is what happened.
That is a really interesting point, and I totally see. I hadn't seen it before, but now that you say that, yeah, I totally see that.
The beat's
And
the same. Yeah.
and I love the two French guys who toast each other after this.
That's got to be father and son.
Yeah, that looks like it. And Colburn's kind of realization that this is resistance, and
resistance.
Dites-moi. You can speak English, I understand.
Bloody good.
And he says that he's an escaped British officer. I'm trying to get to Spain.
Oui.
Can you help me?
I know someone who can.
Bloody good.
So, man, Sedgwick, he gets lucky.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does.
Next, Colin and Henley. They arrive at an airport. They see a plane that Henley says he can fly. He takes out one sentry. Then they go out and he gives Colin the crank to crank start the propeller.
Crank this clockwise. When the engine catches, don't move. You got a mouthful of propeller.
Which, again, as a blind guy, this seems really scary. And here's
he can't fly the plane, Steve. He's got to rev it up.
I know. So here's what happened. So they found this old trainer that barely worked. Okay. And they could start the propeller. It was on the inside. It's just wires pulled out everywhere, and it's kind of jury rigged. And the morning they're going to shoot it, they're having a really hard time getting that propeller to start. And they have, crew members are all trying crank. It won't catch. Then they have a bunch of German military that are there, I guess, as advisors or something. And they try to get it to go, and it won't go. And they go, well, I guess we'll shoot it and we'll have to cut or something because this propeller won't start. And so they give it to Donald Pleasance, and then James Garner goes up to the crew and goes, okay, well, what do I do if it starts? And they go, don't worry, it's not going to start. Like we've been trying all morning. We can't get this thing to kick. And he goes, okay. So Henley gets in the thing and he goes, okay, start it. And Donald Pleasance, a crank and a half, and that thing starts. So now suddenly you're in this old plane that barely works with a running propeller that they didn't think were going to go. And Garner just goes, I just have to go with the scene, God,
that's hilarious.
And then we fly off and we have this moment of we're going to make it. Like there's the Alps. It's 20 more minutes.
Yeah.
And then something goes wrong. We're suddenly out of gas, losing power. And he puts his arm on Colin and they crash that plane. And the thing is, you want to know how they crashed the plane?
Go ahead.
They crashed the plane.
Wow.
So like one of the ADs or something was also a pilot. And he said, oh yeah, I can crash it. And the idea was, and this was, like I said, a barely running plane.
Right.
And he said, well, the idea, I'll just get it going and we won't take off or anything. And then I'll run it into these trees. But I guess it had more power than they expected. And suddenly he's in the air, like 10 feet off the ground, heading for these trees. I mean, he's lucky he didn't get killed.
Yeah.
This guy. And then this is the moment. The plane's on fire and Henley gets Colin out and pushes him and says, go that way. And Colin walks to the top of the hill and sees something in the distance, but he can't see well, and we can. And it's Germans, and they take aim at him, and he turns around and says, Henley, and gets shot in the back.
Henley!
It's so sad.
Yeah.
Colin? I'm sorry I fouled things up.
That's right. Thank you for getting me out.
And dies.
Damn. It's such a shame. And like I said, like this is the relationship. This is the bromance in the film.
Yeah.
And so to have this moment right at the end here with Colin, who's only had one moment of explosion, and it was only because he wanted those papers to be right so that everybody could escape and live. And to have him die in this way and being shot in the back, considering he was blind at the time, it's just like, it's even more of an insult to injury. But Colin having that moment, Garner doing a nice job with that moment of, real vulnerability and care for him and reaction. I mean, you see, he wants to get up and kill the guy, the German Nazi who killed him. You see that flash across his face and the bloody nose and everything. He has that moment, and then he understands like it's a losing game. So.
I like I said, I've seen it so many times. I can't imagine what it was like to see it the first time. But this to me seems like such a turn in the film.
Yeah, Agreed.
I mean, Ives was a tragedy, but we're still on the journey of like, hey, we're all going to escape and we're all working towards this goal. And the moment that Colin gets killed, it's just, and Cavendish has already been captured. And you're like, this isn't going to go well.
No, and I think it's smart to have this be the first death. As you said, it's foreboding and foreshadowing what we're about to get. Because I imagine audiences, even up to this point, which is about 2 hours and 30 minutes into the movie, we're thinking, okay, some of them are going to escape.
Yeah.
And even Colin being shot, it's not because he's not the main character or one of the main characters. You're like, okay, of course, this happens in movies. One of the lesser characters gets killed, but still, it's a powerful moment. But this is the slow build to where you get to that moment where they're all taken out of the truck and shot on the mountain or on the hill. And this is the beginning of that. So, astutely pointing that out, Steve, that the movie completely changes here and destroys the audience's expectations that people will survive.
And so then after this tragic moment, we also have our most adventurous, which is Steve McQueen on the motorcycle.
Yeah, man.
Now, obviously, McQueen was a serious biker. This was stuff he did. And what's funny is, according to what I heard, there's only like 3 or 4 stuntmen on this movie. And McQueen and his buddy are the 2 guys that can ride bikes. So frequently it is McQueen riding as himself, occasionally doubled by his friend. But it's also McQueen as some of the German soldiers chasing himself.
Yeah.
Which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
And we see that he's almost at Switzerland. He looks at the tank. He thinks, he rides down into this town. And there are soldiers there who call him over. And he rides up to him and then kicks the soldier and they takes off as they open fire. And we get just these amazing shots of him riding up and down these green hills. We end up at a barn where he thinks about hiding, decides to take off his uniform because, again, he's a spy if he's wearing that uniform.
Right.
And he sees soldiers coming towards him and he pulls out his pistol and takes aim and they go the other way so he doesn't fire. It's later on, he's back in that iconic kind of white and blue outfit and he's riding along these hills.
Yeah.
And he gets to the top of the hill. This all looks so great.
Yeah.
He's looking around and he sees this barbed wire barrier with this no man's land. You're like, oh, this is the border with Switzerland. And there's this moment where you kind of realize what he's about to do.
Yeah. He's just got to get over that barbed wire. That's how close he is.
Yep.
And the irony, because here's Hiltz, in a sense, needing to climb the fence. Like he saw the Scottish guy do and get killed for it. Now he's got to do the same thing. So there's a little bit of full circle type thing in this moment.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're totally right. And the Steve wanted to do this jump himself.
Yeah.
And the studio said, absolutely no way. It's like a 60-foot jump between wooden structures. Like, there's no way you're going to do this. And so he goes, okay. But Elkins does it. So that is him doing the jump. As soon as they yelled cut, Steve grabbed the motorcycle and said, my turn.
Yeah, I've heard this story. It's great. He's told this story. If you go back and watch the old interviews, it's great. Yeah. So the claim is that, because they both can claim this, they both claim the other one until the end of their lives. Both Steve and Bud claimed it was the other one who did the jump, which I thought was great. Like, that's a great way to keep that. The one that's used in the film is they each claim it's the other one, to kind of give credit to both, which I think is a great symbol of friendship between them.
And now he's in the no man's land between these 2 barbed wire barriers, riding along, and then they open fire on him and he crashes into the barbed wire. It is so sad. And I love the way McQueen plays this whole thing.
I thought he was dead the first time I watched it, and I was like, fuck. And then seeing him with the, tangled up in the barbed wire and the flipping over, as I said, of the captain bars. I said in the first episode of this show that he's very much a guy who will throw his rank when it's necessary, use his rank when it's necessary, and certainly does in that moment.
Well, and is just kind of trying to stand and trying to lift up both hands, but can't because the barbed wire is preventing him. And the sort of sheepish one hand up kind of look that he gives is also great. Sturgis, by the way, says that he put some real barbed wire on McQueen for this so that he was cut up a little bit, but he wanted, and McQueen liked the idea. It's like, I want to be actually feel what this feels like, you know? So we've had Colin and Henley.
Yeah.
And then that moment of Steve McQueen getting caught is just like, oh, this isn't going to work, you know?
Yeah.
This whole thing, because the movie makes you so hopeful.
Yeah.
Because they're so amazing at what they're doing. We're back with Mac and Roger and Ashley Pitt at the train station. And there is that guy in that same long leather jacket whose name is Kuhn. And they're watching the passengers get off. And Ashley Pitt sees Kuhn. And that guy says,
yeah.
And then Ashley Pitt grabs him, tackles him, and takes his own gun and forces Kuhn to shoot himself in the chest. And then he is running away, and he gets shot in the back and goes down. Couple things about this. One is it's a great shot as the crowd parts and he's running and then he goes down. Two is the actor playing Ashley Pitt, whose name is McDonald, I think.
Yeah.
He goes, look, you only get to do this kind of death once. I need to make it look really good. I'm young enough to just go for it. And man, that fall he takes looks like it hurts.
Yeah, because he is going full speed.
Yep.
It's David McCallum. He's going full speed, falls onto his knees. He might have had some thin knee pads, but it is full speed, man. Because it's a long shot of him running down the platform. That is right. And it's a one shot. It's him running down the platform, shot, stumbling onto the tracks, taking off his glasses, and then dying. Yeah.
That shot, by the way, the way he falls always reminds me of the famous shot in French Connection where the guy gets shot in the back.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, that distraction allows McDonald and Roger to get away.
Yeah.
By the way, most of the extras are like foreign exchange students who were studying in Munich, and a lot of them spoke English, and so that's who they set up as extras. And this is what Sturgis says about when you would come to a town, and you need extras and you need support from the town. That he said the first thing you do is you say, "What do you need?" It's like, "Oh, you need a new school bus. Oh, you need the church repaired. Oh, you need this," and then you do that thing. So he would send his crew to repair the local church that had been damaged during the war, and then the town is like, "Hey, you could do whatever the hell you want." That's how you make friends with people before you shoot in their area.
That's smart. Very smart.
We're heading into a bus, and everyone's papers are getting checked, and Mac and Roger are in line, and we hear them speaking French.
Merci. Si. Au revoir, monsieur. Au revoir.
And then he says,
good luck.
And McDonald says,
thank you.
With the nod. Thank you.
It's just so,
cool, man.
Oh my God, it hurts so much, that moment.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And I wish Roger never blames him. Like he never.
No, of course not. They take off. They take off.
Yeah. They're running. They get separated. And Mac gets like trapped in a doorway. And I love the shot of him running towards camera to get through the Germans.
Yeah. Smart placement. It's a good point, Steve. You bring up the direction here, Sturgis, keeping the camera far away, so it adds more to the tragedy and the hopelessness that is you as an audience member. The instinctual desire to help that you have when you're watching a situation like this, and hopefully you've done an effective job of establishing these characters with an audience, so that the audience feels that helplessness because they're so far away and just have to watch it happen.
And you're in this moment of like, oh, we got 76 guys or whatever it is got out, and we're going to get away, and McQueen's got on a motorcycle, and it's really like, oh shit, it's Roger alone on a rooftop, the last guy running, and he runs along the rooftop. He manages to get down. Someone catches him. He speaks to them in German.
You are English? Engländer? Sie bedrohen mich mit einer Pistole? Nehmen Sie sie sofort weg. Ach, Sie sind Deutscher.
And they drive away.
Yep.
And you're like, he's going to make it. It's going to be okay. And he grabs a newspaper, and you could see like he's calming down.
Yeah.
He's sitting at the corner, probably pretending to read the newspaper. And then we hear,
Herr Bartlett? Heute erfreulich. Your German is good.
And I hear also you're French. Your arms up.
And that's it for Roger.
That's such a great actor, Carl Otto Alberti, because if you remember, he's the pained German soldier at the end of Kelly's Heroes.
I did not remember that.
Yeah, he's blonde, and he's the one that's like sweating and talking to Clint Eastwood and stuff. So I remember him because he looks a little bit like if you had, how can I say this correctly so I'm not going to offend anybody who might be his family member listening, but it looks like if you took Marlon Brando and used one of those old school Looney Tunes things, blew more air into him because he's bigger than Brando, but his features are kind of similar to Brando's. So I when I saw him, I was like, oh my God, I know this guy. And I went back and looked him up and I was like, oh, that's right. He's at the end of Kelly's Heroes. And he's like a sweaty, half smiling German the whole time with the money. So it's great. It's great to see him in this role.
And now we see again back with the Gestapo, and they're talking to Bartlett, and there's McDonald. And there is, I would say, the slightest of sheepish looks from McDonald, but I do kind of wish he said, sorry for blowing everything in the stupidest way possible.
Yeah, right.
And now we're out driving in a truck.
What's troubling you, Roger?
I'm just a little surprised. I expected either a long stay or a very short trip.
And then he says, and this line is just so hard. He says,
I have to admit, I'm a little worried, though. I hope to God I haven't blotted 70-odd ledgers.
Oh, no. We're all over 21, footloose and fancy-free. We'd never have got as far as we did without you, Roger. For what it's worth, I think you did a damn good job. I think we all do.
And there's this sort of contentedness about it.
Sturgis, you fucker, man. Yeah.
And they stop the trucks, and it's beautiful morning mist kind of out in this beautiful Bavarian countryside.
Yeah, they stop the trucks to tell them that they're going to stretch their legs because it's a long drive. So it sounds like they're being considerate Nazis.
Mm-hmm. And they look out at the beautiful mountains. Roger and Mac are kind of standing in front. And then Roger says,
You know, Meg, all this, the organization, tunneling, Tom and Harry, kept me alive.
I think that's a James Clavell line because it's very much things that are expressed in King Rat.
Fair enough.
This idea of like, there's one character who basically is, feels that his hatred of this other character is what kept him alive.
Yeah.
And then Roger says,
Even though I've never been happier.
What do you think about that statement?
I think it's Sturgis 100% setting us up for for the most brutal moment in the movie. But if we're looking at Roger and the reason he said that, because remember, as we said in the first part, we think he's been captured a number of times. Certainly he's legendary for breaking out as we're presented in the film. So the fact that he got all these people to work together and all these people to escape this supposedly unescapable prison, 76 people, him standing there saying, I've never been happier, because he was able to lead a mission like this internationally with all these different incredible people and almost pulled it off. And so there's a sense of pride in the fact that people are going to hear about this. So in that moment, he is saying, I've never been happier. And I think that's what it's all about. So it's a perfect setup for him to die in the way that he does in such a brutal fashion, because it adds more to the tragedy. And even what's-his-face starts to respond to him, and they both turn and just completely go ashen as they see that machine gun being set up.
There's that long look of realization of, we're about to die. Like they have just enough time to have the thought, we're about to be killed. And then we don't show it, we hear it. We're in this long, wide shot, and we hear them open fire. And while it didn't happen en masse like this, it was more like 3 or 4 at a time.
Yeah.
This did definitely happen in this way, with stopping the truck and saying, hey, you can stretch your legs. And Hitler wanted them all killed.
Yeah, he did. It was his orders, which he broke the Geneva Convention to do this, but it was his orders because he wanted to discourage anybody else from doing it. Also, he was embarrassed and he knew he was losing the war. So he was becoming more unhinged and desperate, like the clown he was.
We're back at the camp. Ramsey enters the colonel's office, who is literally wringing his hands, and says in a very stilted way,
I am directed by higher authority to inform you that 50 of your officers were shot while escaping.
Donald takes that in for like a moment, right? Just kind of like, what?
How many of them were wounded?
You can see the German commander just struggling. He's ashamed.
Totally.
Great. So great to show that.
Yeah. And this is such a great question of how many of them were wounded. And he just goes,
Here are the names of the dead.
How many of the 50 were wounded?
None.
Which is saying, he's saying, I am telling you they were executed.
Yeah.
You know?
Don't make me say it.
I can't say it, but that is what I'm telling you.
As gentlemen, I'm implying what happened. Don't make me say it. And I love that Ramsey pushes him. You know, I said James Donald earlier, but Ramsey's the character. I love that Ramsey is pushing him to answer him.
He takes it in and he goes,
I see.
And we cut to the camp, everyone assembled, and he's reading off the names, and we hear, including
Bartlett, Roger, Cavendish, Dennis.
And then we cut to a rowboat. And I feel like we've kind of forgotten about Danny and Willie
Danny and
all of this. And there's like a cargo ship there that's called the Alta Stockholm.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, and I'm not entirely sure that I believe it, this is Guerrilla. They were out there in the harbor. He saw this ship, Sturgis did, and said, hey, Charles Bronson and whatever the other actor's name is, just row to that ship over there and jump on that ladder. And so they do, and they're filming it, and someone on the cargo ship yells like, hey, what are you doing? And thought that they were Germans, and the Swedish aren't big fans of Germans at post-World War II.
I'm sure.
And they were yelling like, no, we're Americans. It's okay. We're just making a movie, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah.
And then we're on a trail with Sedgwick. And so these are our good moments. Those two guys escape.
Yes.
And now we're with Sedgwick heading to Spain, and his French guide walks away, and his Spanish guide comes up and he goes,
I am your guide, senor.
Spain?
España.
And it is true that 3 people, and only 3 people, managed to get to freedom after the Great Escape.
Yeah.
More prisoners kind of shuffle into camp, including Henley. So Henley survives.
What happened to Blythe?
He didn't make it. Roger was right about that.
I'm afraid Roger didn't make it either.
And Garner's reaction is great.
Roger's idea was to get back at the enemy the hardest way he could. Mess up the works. From what we've heard here, I think he did exactly that.
This is the weird magic trick that I think Sturgis is trying to pull off.
Yeah.
We've just had this horrible tragedy.
Yeah.
That should make you feel like this is a failure. And what Sturgis is trying to get us to believe is that because of the chaos caused behind the German lines, that this isn't a failure.
Yeah.
That we actually, even though it's tragic, that we should feel good about it on some level. And then German car comes in, and I think this is like the new commanding officer. And also Hilt shows up, handcuffed. And he watches Colonel von Luger come out.
He is not to be saluted. He's no longer in command.
Job just didn't work out, huh?
You were lucky, Hills.
Lucky? Maybe because I didn't.
And this is what's so great that they did with Steve McQueen's character is that he's really smart. He might not act smart all the time, but he looks at his faces and then says,
How many?
50. It looks, after all, as if you will see Berlin before I do.
Yeah.
And they put him in the car. Is he going to be killed?
Oh, yeah. 100%. Not even a question he's going to be killed. I mean, as unhinged as Hitler was at this point, yeah. He's absolutely going to be killed.
They uncuff Hiltz, they walk him through the gate, and then we hear that theme. And this is where investing, setting up how they filmed every time he goes into the cooler the same way with the same music pays off. Because now we get that music, and it's joyful in this really weird way and triumphant. And he's walking through, and everyone starts to crowd around him. It's like the hero has returned.
Yeah.
And I love that the music sting hits on Goff throwing him the baseball glove.
Hey, Hilt!
then it's the same shot of him walking into the cooler, same guard. He walks down to the hallway, and that guard, by the way, is the second AD, just so you know. And he goes into the cooler, the guard closes the door, and he stops for a moment and listens, and then we hear the sound of throwing the ball against the wall. And we see this picture is dedicated to the 50th. And that, if this time watching it made me cry, just Hiltz going back into the cooler.
Mm.
And it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre because it feels triumphant in this weird way.
It does. Yes. You didn't break their spirit.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's what you want to take away from the end of the movie. Yes, we lost 50. Yes. And yes, the Nazis were brutal. They violated the Geneva Convention. They were horrible people. But they didn't break our spirit. We still survive. And I loved Ramsey getting that back and forth, talking to Henley and saying, like Henley asked, was it worth the price? And Donald and Ramsey saying in that moment, like, it depends on your perspective, right? It depends on your point of view. Because we lost good men today. But we also launched a PR war against the Germans and showed that if we work together, we can defeat this evil. If we work together from different nations, we can defeat this evil. So it's a matter of your point of view. I lost a good man who I respected. He will not be able to lead any more missions because he's dead. But on the other side, his final act was an act of defiance against an evil regime. So in a way, he went out the way he wanted to go out, and I have to respect that. But we've lost his expertise. So I love that it leaves everything open. I don't think it's an anti-war movie in the way that we saw later on as movies would come out later. They were a bit more anti-war as a subtle message. But I think it is a message that shows you that when an evil regime comes into power, there will always be a rebellion, and there will always be people with strong spirits who can't be broken by that. And they will always try to defy that power. And so I think that's what's great, because even McQueen, when he walks by Ramsey, he just says, sir. He doesn't make a stop and salute him, which they probably would have allowed him to do. He just walks by in that American arrogance. And by the way, it's the two Americans who walk back into camp.
Yep.
Because Garner is leading a crew of people who lived, but none of those people were people we focused on in the movie. And McQueen comes in solo, and also, completing what Sturgis had told him about, you're going to be the hero who didn't want to be the hero, but becomes the hero. Trust me, you're going to be great at this. And him walking in with the two soldiers behind him, he swaggers in, doesn't stop, says sir to Ramsey, and keeps going, gets back into that cage or into the cooler, grabs that ball and that glove, and does his thing as an American would, or as you've seen Americans do in these movies. And so I love it. At that ending, it shows you the defiance of spirit, but on the other side, also the conundrum of, was it worth it? So it's a good balance here at the end to satisfy the people who are more into the American defiance and the people who are more into the intellectual discussion about decisions made during a war. So it's a smart ending for sure.
You know what? It just occurred to me that there feels like there's like a connection between these two, and I don't know if you'll feel this. That obviously they're very different in many ways, but it made me think of Andor this time.
Oh, great! How can it not be connected? You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Defiant to the end, a crew of people from multiple different planets that have been taken over by the Empire. They are shoved together in this prison. You have the Andy Serkis character who is just trying to get through it, believes the bullshit that he's been fed. So, absolutely. The defiance all the way to the end. Yes.
By the way, in the real story, there was a huge hunt for the murderers of the 50 after the war.
Yes.
They caught 13 of them, most of which I think were hanged in 1948.
Yeah.
This movie had a $4 million budget. It was scheduled for an 83-day shoot. They took it went a little bit over budget, and they shot for 100 days. It premiered in June of 63. It was a huge hit, $11.7 million at the box office, which is one of the biggest movies of 1963. But critically, it got kind of a mixed reception.
Yeah. See, I'm not alone, Steve. I'm not alone that there was a bit of a mixed reception for this one. Yeah.
The only thing it was nominated for was editing, which it lost.
Yeah.
This is a weird year of movies, some of which I've seen, many I haven't. Tom Jones won Best Picture, which I have never seen.
No one talks about Tom Jones anymore.
Nope. There's the Elia Kazan movie America, America, which I've never seen.
Mhm.
There's Cleopatra was nominated for Best Picture, which is not. It's a terrible movie.
Terrible.
How the West Was Won, which isn't a particularly good movie.
Yeah, it's fine. But yes, you're right. It's not a particularly good movie.
And Lilies of the Field was nominated, which is a good movie.
Right.
But here's some of the other movies that year. HUD, The Birds, Charade, Kurosawa's High and Low, It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, The Original Nutty Professor, and Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
Many of which are better than what the Best Picture nominees were that year.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. Yeah.
And that is everything I have on The Great Escape. Do you have final thoughts?
First of all, you were right to be optimistic. We are concluding this discussion in this part. But I will say this. I think what's fascinating, I didn't say this about the ending, so I want to throw this in and then give you my final thoughts. I love the way the ending is constructed by Sturges. Look, I've said the film doesn't 100% work for me. So I'm in that camp of the mixed critics. But I can also recognize how well Sturges directed this movie, how well it was edited. Really, I'm growing more and more in my appreciation of editors combined with directors, because I think it's really important to get the right emotional hit. The ending here is so good with every story, because every story ends with if they had just gotten that little bit extra, they'd have survived. So the tragedy is multiplied exponentially with every story, right? Except for, of course, Coburn and Danny and Willie, who get away. But with Attenborough and his companion there, they're so close to getting away. Just that one mistake by him, and then Bartlett can't quite get past that last barrier. Even though we think he's going to be caught in the alley or in the roadway, the Germans in that car let him go. It's the guy at the end who catches him just after he gets away from that situation. So close, right? Garner and them, they're like, what were they, 20 minutes away from safety. Steve McQueen is just a few yards away, or a few feet away from jumping over that, from clearing that fence and being safe in Switzerland. So they all come so close, and fuck Cavendish. They're all so close to getting out of the situation. But they all get caught and they all die. And that's why I think the tragedy of the ending of the movie is so well constructed to lead to that moment on the hill. And it's devastating. And I like that they showed it. Not showed the people dying, but showed you the effect of hearing the gunshot, seeing it on such a beautiful landscape like that, to show you the horror of war. And then that ending with all them coming back, with those two guys coming back, Garner and McQueen back into the camp, of course, for the American ending. But still, it was strong and it was powerful. And I enjoyed that about the ending of the movie. So I wanted to get that out as a credit to Sturges and the way and the editor and the way they constructed this. Final thoughts are this. This is absolutely a fantastic film objectively. From the writing to the acting, to the editing, to the direction, to the way it's all laid out, to keeping your attention for 2 hours and 52 minutes. It is a objectively, fantastically well-constructed film. For me, the emotions don't 100% work every single time. And I don't find the powerful ending to move me emotionally as Steve admitted that it did for him, which I totally respect. So for whatever reason, and I can't really pinpoint it out, it would be too specific. It doesn't all the emotions or all the storylines don't 100% slam together to deliver a whopping ending for me emotionally. But I cannot deny how incredibly well constructed and built and shot and filmed and acted this film was. So for that reason, I think it must endure. I think people have to keep this film in the conversation of greatest films of all time. And I respect the fact and enjoy the fact that we did it for the Cine-Files. And I will say, coming into it, as Steve and I mentioned in the first episode, or the first part of this particular episode, I wasn't sure if I was going to come out enjoying the film. But as always, having the conversation with Steve, it's always fun for us to explore the nooks and crannies of a movie and find the joys in them, even if they may not 100% work for me or Steve by the end of our conversation. So those are my final thoughts.
It is really the great thing that we found a way to make a job out of us getting to have fun conversations about movies. I think we really scored on that. I'm really having a hard time figuring out how to sum up my final thoughts. Of course, I agree with everything you said across the board, all the people that worked on it. I would add Elmer Bernstein and the score to it, which is just so good. And I think here are a couple of thoughts. The first is I love watching intelligence, and I love watching discipline and hard work and interesting ideas.
Yeah.
And so just as like a caper movie, we're going to pull off this really difficult thing. It's great.
Yeah.
In terms of what you do to fight adversity and the defiance of Steve McQueen and the defiance of Roger and of what they're willing to do and willing to sacrifice. Danny going back into the tunnel when he's terrified. Mm-hmm. Donald Pleasant's blind and is still like never complaining. None of that. All that stuff I think is great.
Yeah.
To me, it's the casting. That's the number one, is that I just fall in love with these characters and I love spending time with them. And this is one of those movies where, oh, here I am again. Oh, good. I'm just completely happy to go back into that world. And that is why there's this other component to this film. And I think we all have films like this, which is that this film is part of my family.
Yeah.
It's not just that it's a great movie, although I think it is. It's that this is my dad, and this is, Sunday afternoons at my house, and this is rented on VHS, and I owned it on Laserdisc, and I owned the DVD. I've owned multiple Blu-rays because there've been multiple versions of it. I mean, this is always going to be a part of my life, and I'm going to watch it many times in the future because this movie is part of my family.
Yeah.
So that's what we think of The Great Escape. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can visit us on Facebook. Just do a search for The Cine-Files. You can go to Cine_Files if you're a Twitter person. It's the Cine-Files podcast if you're on Instagram. Please subscribe to the show if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google or YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, leave your comments. We'd love to read them. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. If you want to support the show, you can do it at patreon.com/thecine-files. And if you want to buy or stream The Great Escape along with every other movie we've ever reviewed, you can do it at cinephiles.net. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram, and Enterprise Incidents, where we are soon wrapping up the animated series. John, how would people find you?
Yeah, you can always find me at The Roca Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Roca Says, and my other podcasts, The Hot Mic and The Geek Buddies, that are out there for you all to enjoy. And, Steve, just want to throw another recommendation to everybody about the Patreon. Steve and I have come up with some new perks and new benefits for the Patreon at multiple levels. So for those of you who may have hesitated on joining the Patreon, please take a look at it again at patreon.com/thecine-files and look at the multiple tiers. And maybe there's some benefits that might inspire you to support us. And for those of you who already support us, take a look at some of the new benefits that we've got out there for people at the higher tiers. And maybe some of you will think about jumping up, which we would really appreciate as well. So just a further effort from us to give more bang for your buck for all of you who support us and help us to get to the next level and keep growing as a podcast.
I second everything that you said, and I think that is it for this week. We will see you next time for another great film on the Cine-Files.